into the home stretch of the presentations of the conference. And my name's Matt McIlwain. I'm a managing director at the Madrona Venture Group up in Seattle. And I guess the reason I got an opportunity to facilitate this discussion is twofold. One, about 12 years ago, I joined the board of the Fred Hutch Cancer Center, the cancer center up in Seattle. Really an amazing organization that was probably best known originally for bone marrow transplantations and perfecting as much as we can the art of bone marrow transplantations. And then more recently, our firm has been investing in the intersection for the last 6 or 7 years of AI in life sciences, particularly working with companies that are spun out of the Institute of Protein Design. David Baker's lab. David, of course, winning the Nobel Prize this past fall. So just delighted to be here, but I've got some much more interesting panelists than your facilitators. So we're going to turn it over and have just a quick set of introductions as we kick off here.
I'm Jeff, co-founder and CPO of Rad.ai, AI company in radiology. My background is as a radiologist. I started really young, went to college at 13, med school at 16, became the youngest radiologist on record in the US. Practiced as a radiologist for about 10 years doing overnight ER radiology. And we really focus on workflow in radiology. So how do we save radiologists time, reduce fatigue, and burnout?
Hi everyone, Dimitry from Australia. Just arrived in the US 3 weeks ago, based in Boston. Co-founded the company with my brother, who is a medical doctor and a genius. So as his older brother, it's hard to admit that. But we work in radiology and pathology AI. We build pixel AI, looking at the images, making sure that the radiologists and pathologists detect disease earlier and faster. We have the privilege of caring for about 7 million patients in 11 countries at the moment, after 5 years of starting the company.
I'm D.A. Wallach, and I've got kind of a quirky background. I started my career as a professional rock musician, which is why I moved to LA originally and have lived here since. And about a decade ago, started investing in early stage tech companies, have backed businesses like Spotify and SpaceX and a number of others. And somewhere along the way, got very interested in healthcare and life sciences investing. And the firm that I now run, BioVentures, exclusively invests in those areas.
So there was a panel this morning more broadly on the whole area of healthcare and AI. We're going to get a little bit more specific in a few minutes. But I want to start first with you, DA. And maybe you've written some really interesting pieces. This one I read, zero-toll medicine. Yeah, I found that.
Oh
and
gosh.
So can you help frame the challenges in healthcare and the misalignments that are out there that are relevant to this panel?
It's a great question, very broad question, so thank you. I'd say one of the compelling things about investing in our broken healthcare system, which you're well acquainted with, is just how broken it is and how broken it is in almost every domain.
Yep.
And so you can slice and dice those problems in various configurations, but at the fundamental level, what's going on is that medicine, and the physician here will be able to speak to this more intelligently, medicine, I think, is going through the biggest transformation that has occurred in probably about 100 years. Maybe the advent of antibiotics was like the last major revolution in some sense. And there are things that people have been talking about for decades, like the increasing focus on prevention as opposed to just treatment. That's sort of at the core of this MAHA movement that we're hearing a lot about. But really, it seems that AI is going to represent another major component of this transformation, in that we have to figure out how to do a lot of things that right now we do with very expensive people with software.
Yep.
And if you live in a Western, rich, industrialized setting where you have access to great physicians, that may feel like a threat somehow to the status quo that's decent. But unfortunately, most people around the world do not have that same access to super high quality care. And even within a country like the United States, we have a tremendous variance in the quality of care because it's not being standardized by software. Our model is basically to take really smart young people, try to, over the course of several years of school, jam a huge amount of information into their heads, and then, in a sense, send them out into the world to function as much like computers as we can get them to. Of course, with softness around the edges and bedside manner and all the rest, but ultimately, when you see a physician, what you're hoping they will do is process a bunch of information about what's going on with you and figure out what's going on and what needs to be done. And that's obviously something that is now going to be done increasingly with software. And that's going to be a huge transformation for medicine.
So Jeff, take us into the experience of the doctor. You're a radiologist. We all know that kind of early detection is one of the very, very best forms of prevention. But this world that DA is articulating is the world you've lived. Tell us a little bit about that world and why it's just so hard and so likely to lead to misdetections or non-detections.
Sure. Yeah, I would agree that there's a very big disparity, even within the U.S. and across, of course, across the world, between people that have very high-quality care versus those that don't. In one of our products is called Continuities to make sure patients come back for their follow-ups. So if you go to the ER, for instance, and have a CT abdomen pelvis done, for abdominal pain, for example, and it turns out that you have a liver lesion, your ER doc is not going to be responsible for ordering that follow-up in 6 months, right? Because they're not your primary care doctor. And then the patient goes home with a stack of paper or files and has no idea what's going on, and then the primary care provider for that patient never gets the report. And that happens at most hospitals and health systems around the US even. And so follow-up is actually mostly doesn't happen. So across the US, average follow-up rates for potential cancers is about 30%, right? And so a patient comes back years later with metastatic disease from their liver cancer. And so we really need to close that loop, make sure patients get their follow-ups, ensure that communication happens to the provider, happens to the patient, and that something drives that follow-up.
Dimitry, maybe you could chime in, and we're going to get to what both of your companies are doing to address these things, but I want to stay focused on the problem space first, and what you've seen in pathology and the challenges of getting to early detection.
The tsunami hit America last. The US has the highest number of radiologists and pathologists per capita of any country in the world. The UK have half the number of radiologists per capita that the US have. So the challenge that we're facing here in the US in terms of radiologist capacity, in terms of we waiting longer, people not following up, is because we don't have capacity. But the rest of the world has been dealing with this for a long time. Developed country, Australia, the UK, Europe, don't have the same number of radiologists as the US. So the US finally experienced the challenge that the rest of the world have. And that's why the US is the latest round of AI adoption. UK, Australia, and Europe has been adopting AI in radiology for much earlier because they have to, because the burning platform has been there for longer. So I think it's nothing new that capacity is a problem. We don't do preventative medicine, not because we don't care or we don't think about it, because we don't have the people to go out and screen people. We don't even have enough people to treat the sick people, let alone screening the healthy people. So I think whatever we do as an industry, as healthcare, as tech people, need to tackle the capacity problem. 90% of medicine is just doing something that we know how to do very well. CT abdomen and pelvis, chest x-ray, basic things. 10% is advanced drugs, advanced cancer treatment, biomarkers, amazing therapy. But those things not going to have the same impact as just doing the thing that we know how to do well. We just don't have the capacity to do it. So that's how I think about the problem.
Yeah, and I think that also there's the sort of the temporal dimension too. If I get that first scan and that's clean, and then I get the next scan and that's clean, and then the next time around it's not, then that's a very, very big signal. And having the systems to be able to do that is, I think, I did the Pronuvo scan, for example, for the first time this past year. That was good in and of itself. It's going to be even better after I've done it 2, 3, or 4 years. DA, maybe let's pop up a little bit to what is the state of AI in radiation and pathology. Maybe you can outline the broader state, and then we'll ask Dimitry and Jeff to tell us a little bit about specifically what their companies are doing.
Well, frankly, these guys know 100 times more about what's happening in the field than I do. But where I sit as an investor, we've been watching this story start to unfold for 7 or 8 years. I think it was significant that the first major breakthroughs in machine learning this decade were with visual context. And so image recognition was obviously one of the first kind of amazing parlor tricks of this set of technologies. And so it was natural for people to think that the first place it could be applied in medicine was an area where there was imagery being processed basically by humans visually interpreting that information. And it's been puzzling and I think illustrative of the complexities in our system to see it adopted in what feels like a very fragmented and inconsistent way. I think you guys are living it, but I would love in your comments to get some understanding of just what that fight has been like, because selling into large health systems in America, selling into specialty clinics or radiology centers is not straightforward. And certainly there's been this question as to whether the point of the software is to replace the people or just to augment them. That's also a debate that investors have had to navigate. And I think those who maybe came up in healthcare investing have across the board been much more biased to thinking that it's going to be augmenting humans, because anything in healthcare that threatens the personnel who are incumbents is going to have a tough time getting purchased.
Yep. Dimitry, why don't you dive in on exactly the problem that you saw and what you've been doing to address it?
Let's take something as simple as a chest X-ray. I think most of us have a chest X-ray, or a couple of one in our lifetime. And someone who trained like Jeff would look at a chest X-ray and say, I can see probably over 100 things. Potentially it can be negative or positive. Is there rib fractures? Is there lung cancer? Is there gas in the abdomen? That's why it takes so long to train these skilled people. In the Europe market, CE mark allows you to run a clinical study to approve all those findings in a single study. We have 124 indications approved with CE mark, MDR class 2, 136 indications approved in our CT head, meaning that when the radiologist opening up a chest X-ray, the AI will check for all 100 things and say yes or no on those things and help the radiologist that way. When we took our product to the US, the FDA say, wonderful, let's submit 100 510K, and we see each other in 10 years. That is why the US adoption of AI in visual, even though we know how to build the technology, has been slow, is because the FDA has been stuck in a 20-years-old paradigm of approving one indication at a time. So my point of view in terms of the US is change management is hard, but to start with, you need to have a useful product. And there have yet to be a visual AI solution that is useful. I have a lot of admiration for Jeff and RAD.ai and what they're doing, because they managed to reach half of the radiologists in the US using your product on a different workflow. But I think on our domain, we think that we're on the cusp of change with the new administration and with the new people at FDA in terms of adopting what Europe, Australia, UK has been using for the last few years.
You want to tell us about RAD.ai, Jeff?
Sure. Yeah, so we started RAD.ai 7 years ago, really focused on radiology workflow. So we as radiologists actually spend 75–80% of our time dictating reports, just manual dictation. And so dictating 100, 200 reports a day is just essentially nonstop. And so in order to save radiologists time, reduce fatigue and burnout, you really have to help them automatically generate more of the report. And so our first product, we were lucky, started coming in 2018, right when transformer models first came out. That became the basis for large language models. So we released the first generative AI product in healthcare back in 2018, 2019. Which is now used by about half of all US health systems, 9 of the 10 largest radiology groups. And so we didn't, everything we built wasn't considered a medical device, which allowed us to move a lot faster. And so we automatically generate parts of radiology reports to save the radiologist time, reduce fatigue and burnout, improving the overall quality of reports at the same time. And then over time, we've also built additional products for patient follow-up, making sure patients come back for their follow-up exams.
So it's really more of a workflow for helping the doctors, the folks participating and partnering with the doctors, and then ultimately the patient with the entire experience. And you were very early in applied AI, generative AI. Maybe say a little bit more about how, has it been more of the workflow, the embracing of change by the doctors and the medical community, or the AI that have helped you to accelerate the adoption? And how do you weight those things?
It's very much about the ROI, right? So making a difference for the radiology practice, for the health system that you're serving, right? So what do they care most about? How are you benefiting them most? And building that brand where people actually care about what you're building, believe that it helps them. There's word of mouth from practice to practice, health system to health system, that it really makes a positive difference for their daily routine, their sense of fatigue and burnout, that it makes them feel better at the end of the day.
Yep.
And then for health systems, that's different, right? So for health systems, we tend to focus on improving turnaround times and improving overall quality of care and generating new revenue for the health system. And so those things also matter a lot to the health system.
Well, I want to come back to business model in a little bit, so I'm going to hold on that, but I definitely think that the most important AI model is the business model. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about how you've been seeing adoption and how you've been leveraging AI in your product.
So what we're seeing is half of all radiologists in Australia using our product. A third of all chest X-ray in the UK, 3 million patients a year, is going through our technology today. We see rapid adoption outside the US because of the more expensive product that we can offer outside the US. And the business model is very simple, dollar per scan. $1 per chest X-ray, $5 per CT brain. Our AI in the UK has been shown to improve, come back to the topic of today, AI meets cancer, lung cancer detection 16 months earlier on published result. Lung cancer is a super aggressive cancer. To pick it up 16 months earlier on chest X-ray, not CT scan, chest X-ray routine is very powerful. So is the dollar too cheap to picking up lung cancer? Maybe. My investor keep telling me that I should raise my price. But fundamentally, we think that this is the kind of technology that can scale at the speed of software. This is a company and a technology that have a moat of a pacemaker, but have a margin of a SaaS company because there's nothing to ship.
How did you learn your way into the image types that you wanted to work with most?
We take a view, what is the largest modality? What is the part that takes the longest amount of time of a radiologist's time? Chest X-ray is about 30 to 40% of all scan of any hospital in the world. Then CT brain 10%, CT chest 10%. So our goal is to attack the bread and butter, the high volume. There's always advanced imaging like PET MRI and things that really cool that a doctor want to do. They want to be Dr. House. They want to be, a characters in Grey Anatomy, finding those rare cancer. But what they got stuck to do is 100, 200 scan that mostly normal. The problem is they don't know which case is normal, and they spend a lot of time searching and finding that. Over the break, I got a chance to speak to a March Capital team member who shared that her grandfather, who's a doctor, died of lung cancer that was delayed diagnosis. That is shocking for someone to live in this country to experience that. So it doesn't have to be rural America, it doesn't have to be India, it doesn't have to be China. Everyone, when you go to see doctors, you see your doctors with a degree on the wall, right? It's always impressively framed. What they don't say in that is whether they graduate the top of the class or the bottom of the class. And in our most vulnerable moment, we trust another human being of varying quality. 9 a.m. with a coffee, they're probably not going to miss lung cancer. But 9 p.m., yeah, not so sure. That is where we think AI can really have an impact. And from a business model perspective, we are profitable at any price because it's software. So it's really about value capturing over time and making sure that the doctors adopt it. Because change management is the hardest, so we believe in land and expand. Getting the doctors to adopt the first product. Within the first 2 days of using our product, we always have a moment of truth. When the doctor said, ooh, the AI tell me something that I didn't see. From that point on, you will not take it out of the cold dead hand. They will stick with it because they don't want to be wrong.
Yep.
So very simple business.
No, there's been a number of studies recently. Somebody referenced one of them yesterday where the AI is consistently better than the doctor on diagnosis. And that when you actually combine the AI and the doctor, it actually gets closer to the doctor's less good results. And so, what do we do about that from a human, behavioral change perspective? And, what you're seeing is that the doctor, when they see the benefit, they're embracing the technology.
Recently, there's a New York Times opinion piece by Dr. Eric Topol from Allscripts. And he referenced a research paper that we published in Denmark, where we show that the radiologist performance, radiologist plus AI, and AI alone performance. And you say, how come a radiologist plus AI is not as good as the AI? You think that human plus machine must be better than machine by itself. But humans sometimes, they overrule the AI when the AI is right. So when you average that out, actually, humans tend to drag the AI performance down from a detection perspective. And that, I want to be super respectful about the doctors, and Jeff and my co-founders as a doctor, is the job of the doctor is much larger than staring into a black and white screen and detect things. That's why you go to medical school and have all this training, because you need to be Sherlock Holmes. You need to stitch all these details together. But on a very narrow task of telling black-white things on the screen, computers already far exceed human already.
I think you're doing a nice job of distinguishing between narrow task reasoning and broad context judgment. Is that a fair framing? I mean, you're working with these workflows, but I'm sure you're doing the workflows to help the doctor be able to do a better job at broad task judgment.
Yeah, I'd actually also note one of the largest groups in the country, they did research on improving accuracy with our first product. And they found that we reduced the overall error rate by 63% across reports. But the remaining errors, half of them are from both AI and radiologists, and half of them are introduced by the radiologist after the AI generates the result. So radiologists, I mean, physicians generally, we're not going to be 100% accurate, right?
Sure.
But it's nature of healthcare.
So I'm hearing a lot from Dimitry about the differences between the U.S. and rest of the world, and within the rest of the world, there's lots of differences too. You know, Australia and England being a couple specific examples here. Is that how you see it from a more macro level? And you know, what needs to be changed in particular in the U.S. to allow for more rapid iteration, rapid adoption in some of these areas?
Well, I think you have to start by distinguishing the man-made people problems from the science and technology problems. And one thing that's exciting about this moment is you are seeing this kind of leapfrogging phenomenon because countries that are not as constrained as we are by a really oppressive incumbent system are trying all sorts of crazy stuff. And so in India, for example, you have a lot more of effectively self-service consumer medicine where the patient is opening an app, they're getting some telemedicine or automated AI-like diagnostic advice, and then they're going to an imaging center on their own and paying out of pocket, and then they're sending the result to a doctor of their choice. And so that kind of freedom to, as a patient, decide what technology you want to try. I mean, the patient is the most underutilized force in the whole system because they have the greatest vested interest in having a good outcome. And yet in our model, we don't use them at all. We have a very paternalistic approach to medicine in the United States. So I think it's imperative as an investor or as an entrepreneur to be looking at what people are doing elsewhere in the world. Human physiology is relatively similar.
Yeah.
And so it's remarkable that you have these noticeable differences at a system scale in terms of patient outcomes in different disease areas, in terms of what the standard of care is in different parts of the world. And really, everybody should be looking at everyone else and trying to figure out what the best practices are. And then every country should be in a race to adopt as many of those as quickly as possible. And the United States, shamefully, is spending, as a lot of people talk about, much more per capita for worse outcomes than a lot of other countries. So,
what's your diagnosis here, Dimitry? Your diagnosis of this problem. U.S., spend more money, not as good at care, not allowing the patient to be the advocate.
Not sure if I qualified after 3 weeks being in the U.S. But one thing that I realized is that I pay $1,000 a year for medical insurance in Australia, and I start paying $1,000 a month very quickly when I arrive in the U.S. And one of our key research partners is MassGen in Boston. Wonderful facilities, the best doctor in the world, and they're having backlog at the moment. I would never imagine MassGen, for all the fame and all the attraction of talent and in the middle of Boston, having backlogs. So I think whatever we do, there's a concept in healthcare called lean healthcare. If people coming from manufacturing, lean, meaning you try to reduce waste. Whatever we do, it needs to be both better and cheaper at the same time. I think for a long time, we're trying to be better and more novel therapeutics at much higher cost. I think the cheaper angle have to be the focus going forward.
Yeah.
Jeff, you've lived here a little longer than Dimitry. Sure. So what are your perspectives?
Yeah, I mean, every country has its own issues. So like India, for example, has about 1/9 the number of radiologists per capita compared to the US. And when you go to the primary care doc in India, it's generally your visit about 3 to 4 minutes versus 10, 15 minutes here in the US. So of course, there's not quite as much preventative care and so on and so forth. So every country has some things where it's really good. So for example, in surgeries in India often have much higher success rates than in the US, especially certain systems. So they've learned certain things much better than what we do in the US. And then there are certain things where we're still ahead. So I think if you go around and kind of pick out and learn from the kind of best qualities of each health system, you can kind of figure out what might work better. But of course, there's a lot of these built-in inefficiencies and issues in our health system. A lot of different parties that need to generate revenue in PBMs and pharma and so on and so forth. So across the board, there's so many different key stakeholders that need to be engaged in the US, that it's very difficult to change.
So putting all these complicated stakeholders aside, let's bring it back down a little bit to this AI aspect of it. So is, in your construct, whether it's more for the workflow or for the detection or some of the broader things that you're seeing, DA, is the AI more of a co-pilot? Is it more of an autopilot? Back to this whole discussion of, the AI being better than the doctors, at least for these kinds of narrow, kind of narrow reasoning tasks. How are you thinking about the leveraging of AI and perhaps what might be the limits of the AI today?
It comes back to capacity. In Hong Kong, we run our AI across every CT scan of the brain in the whole territory, 130,000 cases every year. Every patient who have trauma of the brain of any kind go to ED, our AI will be ran. And radiologists only look at 5% of those cases because they purely do not have the capacity to look at 100%. So they say, we are burnt out, we're already working 9 to 9, we cannot keep going on like this. We would like to procure an AI that automate away 95% of our job, please.
And so in some respects there, not directly analogous to DeepSeek and their constraints, the constraints almost force the innovation and the adoption.
It forced the adoption because no one wants change. With a burning platform, you can't get a complex system like healthcare to change. And they've been under this pressure capacity for 10 years. At some stage, they say, ED doctor, please use AI to self-serve radiology 95% of the time so that people like Jeff only look at 5% and can do interventional, can do complex stuff like MRI, because the basic stuff is self-service. There are precedents of this in the US. If you go to OBGYN, they're likely to ultrasound you. In the past, they would send you to the radiologist, but the ultrasound machine and the AI in the ultrasound machine is good enough that they can now do ultrasound themselves and check the babies and everything, and only in rare case send the mothers to a radiologist. So as technology advances, more non-radiologists will be able to self-serve radiology so that the precious capacity of radiology that we have can focus on the most complex patient. So that's why when we talk about replacing or not replacing, my bet is that we need 10 times more radiologists than we have right now. No one will ever going to lose their job because they are the most talented and most difficult people to train. And we need more of them to do MRI and looking after us when they inject us something into our joint or do surgery on our heart. They need a live radiologist there to make sure you cut out the right thing. So I don't think that anyone will lose their job, and it is fear-mongering. People will have their job. We need more of them. And actually, we need to free them up to do more things. Right? So I think Hong Kong is a great example of where things are going. In the UK, chest X-ray already for the last 10 years are read by radiographers, technicians. Again, because they only have half the number of radiologists as the US. So I think that is the direction of travel I foresee in the US as well.
Are you seeing that as well?
There's a lot of competing forces in the US market. So we definitely see increased time savings, increased productivity using AI, right? So augmenting radiologists, saving them time, and different ways of doing that over time when the FDA is able to clear, being able to do the full preliminary draft report directly from the images so the radiologist can review and sign it off, saves a lot more time. Potentially doing negative studies automatically, so saves more time, and so on and so forth. But it's very difficult to get to, so reimbursement structure, malpractice structure, so on and so forth, and then kind of the territory of radiologists for still maintaining their read volumes will kind of keep a lot of that change from happening in the near future.
How far do you go in the workflow? I mean, we've seen a ton of pitches the last 6-9 months of some kind of revenue cycle management. which is this term of art around, I'm a provider, I've provided a service, the insurance company, I'm trying to get them to pay, I'm trying to get them to pay promptly, and I use AI to, whether it's when it's already rejected or when I initially submit it, get my, my procedures, the steps I take, the radiology, scans, the interpretations of those scans reimbursed for. Is that part of the solution you have, or where do you hand off to some of these kinds of folks?
Yeah, we actually showcased that already in our latest product. So RAD-AI reporting is a full reporting solution for radiology, replacement for some other solutions on the market. Some of the integrations we do are with RCM companies. And so they already have their own models that automate coding billing. And so we can actually incorporate those models in real time into our solution to detect when something is not going to be reimbursable, right? And so that allows us to allow the radiologist correct the report in real time instead of having to do addenda later on. So there's definitely room for that. We are seeing more and more coding being automated. So trying to get that fraction of how much automation there is in coding from 25% up to 75% plus. And so hopefully, coding is a really tricky part of radiology, right? So if, say, for example, you're doing an interventional study, if you mention the second versus third branch vessels, it can change the amount you get reimbursed by up to 5x, right? So
sounds a little crazy.
But the underlying incentive is not for the the person in the back office that's helping with billing to go back to the physician to get that changed, because it might not be correct to have it changed, and it's more work than it is worth to go back and change it, right? So you actually often get under-reimbursed just because it's too much work right now.
DA, what are you seeing here on the sort of the broader landscape, being an investor in health tech companies? Whole solutions, narrow solutions, leveraging AI across the entire experience from the patient to the provider to the payer?
I think, like computers or the internet, this is a general purpose technology, and that's why it's potentially such a big deal in the years ahead. And we're primarily seeing narrower focused solutions succeeding, because again, there are just so many siloed problems in healthcare. Now you've got a technology that when it's focused and trained on addressing one of those problems, it's having success in a lot of cases. And so entrepreneurs who understand the system and understand the pain points of the customers from experience are the ones who are starting to take off in these early years. And I think the more exciting, broader, truly disruptive remaking of healthcare remains to have proof points. I mean, you can't yet point to companies that are fundamentally rethinking the practice of medicine with AI that are getting traction.
Is there a wedge or an area you're most excited about or focusing more on as a result of that? It's a big landscape. It's a big part of the GDP. 20% of the GDP, I think, in the United States is the healthcare industry. So where are your spots that you're liking more?
Well, I think primary care is an interesting one because you have very unique capacity issues there. We've been looking at this quite a bit. If you actually measure what the most common diagnoses are for patients who go to see a primary care provider and what the doctors are spending their time managing thereafter, hypertension is number one. Atherosclerosis is like number 2 or number 3. It was basically managed with statins. So the primary care docs are spending an inordinate amount of their time managing chronic diseases, which have relatively formulaic management protocols, and that is what's leading them to have no time. And so what's been left unaddressed is this relationship with a patient over an extended period of time. What people basically want is like the old school family doc who comes to your house and they know your kids and they've been with you for decades. Maybe in the future that person isn't going to be a doctor. That could be a nurse or a nurse practitioner. It could be someone who lives in your neighborhood who's got great software at their disposal. So again, as you start to think about what processes can be offloaded to software, you can imagine fundamentally different division of labor and different training. We're talking about interventional radiologists. That was a discipline that didn't exist 40 years ago. So, and now it's a huge part of medicine. So we're going to have different labor roles in the future. That is what excites me the most, because if we can get out of this model of needing to train people for like 8 years, and then they're so precious that you have to be so choosy about where they spend their time, it would really liberate us to reinvent the nature of the patient relationship in a lot of different specialties.
I'm curious, both of your companies, one more workflow, one more kind of the actual diagnosis. There's been some companies in this space that kind of were celebrated, got started maybe not too much earlier than yours, companies like Page AI, Path AI. Why has it taken so long with those kinds of companies out there, pretty impressive teams, came from sort of storied institutions? What's been causing the delays and even greater adoption? I know you all have had your successes, but more broadly, I think we would all say it's relatively underpenetrated.
I would say pathology is a relatively tricky space. So it's significantly, it's about 1/10 the size of radiology, and there's much more variation in workflow in terms of the how they go about generating the reports, in terms of how much of their slides are digitized, so on and so forth. So it's very difficult to get adoption across many different health systems.
So our company, we have an arm that works in pathology called Franklin AI. We just got UK approval for our prostate AI report writing solution. So taking in the biopsy slides of a prostate biopsy, rating the Gleason score, but also writing all the other qualifications and measurements as well. And we're taking that, if anyone plan to attend US CAP in Boston in 2 weeks, we're launching this product into the US as well. So pathology, like Jeff said, is only 10% digital. 90% of the time, the pathologist still looking down this tiny microscope, moving the slide around, take out a ruler, measuring things. Shocking, right? This is gold standard. This is the person who tell you if you have cancer or not. This is the person who tell you whether they're going to remove your prostate or not and change your life forever. Erectile dysfunction, lifestyle change, hormone change. And this is how they come up with it, looking down this microscope by themselves and making that call on your life. You can't run AI on microscope.
Yep.
That's why pathology AI has been more slow moving. After you scan the slides into a digital giant image, it's the size of New York City Google Map. You need to find the red car, which is the lesion that contain the cancer cells, the Gleason 4, Gleason 5 that you worry about. I think I'm not breaking any confidentiality. We're launching a product that also runs a microscope, because you can't have an AI that only addresses 10% of the time, which is digital. So when we build our AI, we also build an AI that works on microscope, because we want to support 100% of the workflow. It comes down to change management again, which is, I think, a great topic in healthcare. Pathologists, the average pathologist in the US is over 50 years old. They probably look down microscope since they were 14 and fall in love with it. That's why they become a pathologist. Now you take this away, stare down the screen, it's going to be a difficult change. It's not going to happen very time soon, especially if they're about to retire in the next 5, 10 years. They will stick to their current workflow. So
am I assuming correctly that the workflow in Hong Kong that you were referencing before is a digital-first workflow?
That is in radiology.
In radiology.
And thankfully for radiology, we digitized in the last 20 years.
Yes.
We're now by and large done.
Right. So radiology, yes, pathology, no.
Yeah.
And so similarly, are you seeing in some of these international countries that you're working with, the more of a digitized workflow for pathology?
Yeah, the UK, the government put together over 100 million pounds to digitize during COVID. Not because they want to, because they have to. Because you can't bring this precious pathologist to go to the hospital and catch COVID. So they have to get them to report from home. Yep. But if you ship this glass around, it's going to break. And you don't want to biopsy someone's prostate again. It's a very big needle. So you want them to have digital file that they can look up over the internet from the comfort of their home. And I think every change in healthcare that ever happened has been forced into healthcare. We're yet to have anything that comes from inside healthcare, because the doctors are too busy not because they don't want to. They are the smartest people we have in society. So every crisis has facilitated some change. COVID has caused 50% of radiologists in the US to burn out. That is the current statistics. Currently, there's 3,500 job posts on ACR, American College of Radiology website, for radiologists right now. The sign-on bonus to become a radiologist, sign-on, is $200,000 as we speak. Average salary in some of the New York places that I look at, 600, 700, 800. I hope they pay you that much as a founder. This is the state of play we are in. So as the price go up, the attractiveness of AI will go up because something have to give, right? The math have to add up.
Are you seeing more of this embracing, in the pathology area of digitization of the workflow, or is that not what you're seeing?
Oh, it will happen over time, right? It's just a matter of how much time. In terms of what I was talking about in workflow, it's kind of 2 steps after that in terms of how the reports are being generated, so on and so forth. In pathology, varies a lot by health system. And so that really also makes it much harder to adopt any specific AI because some health systems will want it, some won't. And that was a lot of the issues with Paige and
well, that was actually where I was going to go next, just having, my own history. We all have a history, personally or familially with cancer. Both my dad and my granddad were prostate and kidney cancer survivors. But believe me, I get plenty of tests on the prostate side. And I had something that I had seen my primary care doctor, and then I'd seen my prostate doctor specialist, and they're really like, yeah, we need to fax that over to him. I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. They're like, no, because they're not on Epic, and the only way we can get that report over is a fax. That just is insane. So I guess it comes back around to my earlier question around constraints. Is Epic and MyChart an enabler or a constraint to the, and I'm picking on them, but there's other, of course, electronic medical record systems, to this workflow and this sort of speed for not only me as the patient and the experience of getting my results, but the doctor, the associated specialist doctors, et cetera?
I would say it's both. So it depends on the context. They have been very successful at providing EHR technology across the U.S. And once you get Epic in, you can't get it out. So and we do integrate pretty well with Epic over the years in terms of, like our second solution for follow-up, we allow for in-basket messages to providers, MyChart messages to patients. So you can build out all of those integrations to make sure patients are communicated with. You just have to get all the pieces aligned, right? And it is a bit tricky to, whether it's with Epic or Cerner or so on, to get all those pieces working together, especially because every health system is always going through new Epic upgrades and focus on other parts of their IT, right? So it's very difficult to get new technology to be adopted in terms of having the bandwidth.
DA, I'm curious your point of view on this flow. I mean, now you're not living it day in and day out or having lived it, but what do you see as the constraint versus the enabling?
Well, Epic in particular does deserve to be picked on. I mean, they are a monopoly. They're a bona fide monopoly, and I think, I've heard that internally their cultural mantra is never go public and never partner. And they have forestalled a huge amount of innovation in the space because they're a pain in the ass to work with, and they obviously don't want people treading on their territory. So that kind of concentration is not a good thing. I mean, we need a more competitive healthcare market. We want, particularly as there are all these innovative software solutions proliferating, to have a modular system where the best and brightest can throw out an idea and it plugs in and you can try it out and people can mix and match and we can figure out what works as efficiently as possible. And we're very far from that.
Yeah. So Dimitry, I'd love your thoughts on this, but I'm going to, since we only have a couple minutes left, I want to also zoom out and ask you and all the panelists a broader question. And so love you to speak to this on the Epic thing, but then what do you think is the title's AI Meets Cancer. We've talked mostly about radiology, pathology. Zoom out and say, what do you think is kind of overhyped, not going to happen as quickly, and what do you think maybe is underhyped or underappreciated that we're going to, 2-3 years from now, like, oh my God, I can't believe how much progress we've made at the intersection of AI and the whole, from diagnosis to treatment to, kind of, the whole spectrum. in the AI meets cancer realm?
I love the saying that the future is already here. It's just unevenly distributed. We just need to look into other places like Hong Kong, UK, Australia. Within the US, you can looking at Stanford, at what they're doing, Mass Gen, what they're doing, and some of the other AMCs. It's already happening. We're already detecting cancer earlier. We're already doing some of the things that have been promised. I think one of the topics that we didn't get a chance to touch on today is reimbursement. There's no reimbursement code yet, right, in a big way to enable any of this to happen. We recently got a breakthrough device designation with the FDA, gone on to receive CMS, new technology add-on payments, but it only lasts for 3 years. So everything that coming into this, if we want to become a permanent part of the landscape, need to be funded properly. It may not come down to CMS or commercial payers. Maybe it come down to us, like you say. The patient have the highest stake in this game. When you go to radiology or pathology, you see all this advanced equipment, this giant machine that's going around and on the screen, and you think, wow, this is high tech. But then they resolve it being looked at by the human. We did a survey recently, and we saw that we asked the patient how comfortable you are to have AI participating in your cancer diagnosis. And the patient most comment is, I thought AI already here participating. You're telling me that just a human doing it right now?
Yeah.
So I think the consumer expectation is already far exceed where we are today as an industry. And the payment system need to catch up to enable that to happen.
It's a very good
faster
point.
we see that, I think faster we see the adoption in the next couple of years.
I'm afraid, because I know you guys are going to have something great to say on this topic, that we're going to have to leave it here because we're out of time. But I want to thank all of you, not only for being on this panel, but for all you're doing to help with advancing the cures in cancer.